James. Good morning, the Larry Young Morning Show. We're going to have the opportunity today to have this United States Senatorial Forum, and thank you for joining us. We're happy to say that we're also being joined on WLB 1010 AM, WOL 1450 AM in DC, and of course, Praise 106.1. Coach and Brother Faraji Siv, and we do have our candidates with us. And I was just thinking, just before we get started, in a formal way, we worked out all the who's going to do what first and what. But I couldn't think of nothing else driving to work this morning, guys. I said, my goodness, Barbara Mikulski, one of the greatest United States senators in history. I had the opportunity many times to have breakfast with her in Wyman Park, to come up under her as a youth advisor to Alessandra when she was city council. So I've watched her. And our state had the opportunity to have her serve us so well. And I thought, without looking at anything here that I was told I must do on that, I thought you might want to comment just for a minute on the fact that we're going to lose, in my opinion, one of the top United States senators of all time, Barbara Mikulski.
Well, Larry, it's great to be with you. Long before that, thank you. It's great to be here with everyone this morning. You know, long before the latest Star Wars movie came out, I said that when Barbara Mikulski is with you, the Force is with you. And she has been an incredible force, not just in Baltimore City politics and Maryland politics, but across the country and known across the world. And you know, when I think of Barbara Mikulski, I think of somebody who gets up every day to fight for working people and deliver results for people in Baltimore or around the state. And so she will be, I know that she will continue to play a very active role in our state and our country.
You know, I think we can hardly escape the fact that Senator Mikulski has been a true voice here in our great state and across the nation. She's the first woman that I ever had a chance to vote for on the ballot. And when I think about the doors that she's opened for women, for working people, and the thing that I admire most about Senator Mikulski is that she never forgot that she was a social worker. And that is what framed her work and her life and her legacy in the United States Senate. And I think that either Chris or I, are going to be asked to step into very, very large shoes. And so I think it's a tribute to our state that we've had the benefit of Senator Mikulski into our nation.
Thank you both so very much. Totally agree. Let's start with an opening statement. Congressman VanHollen.
Well, thank you, Larry. It's great to be here this morning. We're in a crazy time in American politics. We have Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner, trying to raise himself up by dividing the country, dividing Americans against one another based on religion, based on ethnicity, based on race. And that's not who we are. And we need to stand up to that kind of demagoguery wherever we see it and focus on meeting the promise of America, which is the promise of equal rights and equal justice and equal opportunity. And that's what I've been doing since my time in the Maryland legislature, when I worked with so many from Baltimore City to have an historic increase in Maryland schools, and especially in Baltimore City public schools. And that's what I've done as Assistant Speaker in the Congress, working with President Obama to pass the historic Obamacare legislation, which now provides affordable health care to 18 million Americans who didn't have it before. And as the lead Democrat on the Budget Committee, it's my job now to prevent the Republican efforts from rolling back Obamacare and preventing their cuts to Social Security and Medicare. These are fights we must take on, but we also need to move forward and make sure that every child, no matter where they live, has a good start in life. And make sure we build an economy that works for everybody, not just the folks who have already climbed the ladder and made it to the top of 1%. And end the scourge of gun violence and the scandal of mass incarceration. These are all big challenges. At the same time, we've got to do what Senator Mikulski did and make sure that we make those necessary investments to make our economy grow here in Baltimore City, address the housing issues, the transportation issues, make sure the Port of Baltimore is strong. These are investments that we need to fight for every day. And we also need to be there for the person who walks into our office in their hour of need and make sure we're there for them to address the issues that are big in their life. I hope to have the opportunity to do that.
Thank you.
Well, Larry, thank you very much for having me this morning. I am so excited to be here. It's great to be a Marylander. We have a state that has so much going for us. We're here in Baltimore, the home of Morgan State University and Coppin State University, great historically Black colleges and universities generally all around our state, and a tremendous and growing research and technology sector that is going to be a boom for us for the 21st century. But the fact is that there are too many of us here in Maryland who are, just struggling to keep our place in the middle class or to just work our way into it. And I think that it's important that as we look to the remainder of the 21st century, that we really create jobs and opportunity for that struggling and growing middle class. I'm running for the United States Senate because I think it's really important that every perspective be around the table and that the voice of the worker who just wants one lousy day off to take off in case a child or a loved one gets sick, and they want to do that without being afraid of losing their job, or for the young woman who doesn't understand why she graduates college, does everything that we tell her to do, and she's being paid 78 cents on the dollar compared to the job that a man does. And for the small businesses and the small growing minority and women-owned businesses that create jobs in our economy, and they create jobs and they deserve a place in the economy. And when I think about the seniors and the veterans who pay every day into Social Security in their job, and it's an earned benefit, and they expect that at the end of that time, that they will have the benefit of that bargain, and they don't want politicians who are going to trade that away. These are the people that I fight for every day, and I intend to fight for in the United States.
Very well, thank you. The question will start with Congressman VanHollen responding, and so we'll go back and forth as it's been worked out. First question. Far too many Marylanders are working harder but still feel stuck in place, even as the very wealthy are doing better than ever. What's outrageous is that we have a tax system that makes the problem even worse. 17% of the value of major tax breaks go to the richest 1%. Taxes is stacked in favor of those who make money off of money and against those who earn paychecks through hard work. What will you do to respond to this question?
Well, Larry, I think this is the fundamental question we face today in America, that people are working harder than ever. Worker productivity is going up and up, but the gains from that additional worker productivity are not going to increase wages and benefits. They're going to the folks at the very top, the top 1%. And long before this campaign started, I put together an economic plan designed to address exactly this fundamental challenge. And it begins, of course, with making sure every child gets a great education, a good start in life, early education. Make sure that we can have kids who graduate from college with a 2-year or 4-year without huge debts, free community college, but it also means changing our tax code. And I have proposed a fee on Wall Street transactions, because the folks on Wall Street have just done fine, people making money off of money, and use those resources to increase the child and dependent care tax credit so people can have affordable child care, to reduce the taxes on working men and women. I've also proposed legislation to end these ridiculous incentives that encourage American companies to move jobs overseas and park trillions of dollars there when we should be encouraging them to invest here at home, and ending the special tax breaks for hedge fund managers in New York and elsewhere who actually pay a lower tax rate than school bus drivers here in the city of Baltimore. So I put forward a plan to change this broken tax system so it works for working people as opposed to folks who are making money off of them.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think here's where, especially among Democrats in the House of Representatives, I think that we have broad agreement, and in the Senate as well, broad agreement about the fact that we have to restructure our tax code so that there are greater benefits for those who get up every day and work for a living or want a job to work for a living. And, restructuring our tax code so that, for example, the mom and dad who are going to work every day have the ability to have their child in daycare and get the benefit of a child independent tax care credit. I've introduced legislation that would increase the incentives for a child independent tax care tax credit. And one of the reasons is because we're spending right now about 35% of our income as working parents on childcare. I've introduced legislation to raise the minimum wage. We have to raise wages so that people have the ability to meet their own responsibilities. I'm grateful that there are a couple of states that have actually moved forward, even in the last couple of days, to raise their minimum wage in New York and California to $15 an hour. I've supported that legislation, increasing things like the tip minimum wage, so people have more in their pocket. It's ridiculous that there are people who are working for sub-minimum wage, many of them women of color, who are living off of tips alone. And so I think there's a lot that we can do in our tax code to shift the responsibility to the top to provide more opportunity for all of us in the middle and who are clawing our way into it.
Very well, thank you. Take a look on the education. Both of you mentioned that. So I want to ask you, some of them are two-part. Legislation that would require the federal government to make good on its commitment to fully fund the cornerstone federal education programs, which will help expand opportunities for students, reduce class sizes, provide more resources to those who need it most. And therefore, hopefully, would you be supportive of every child should have the opportunity to go to college, but that is slipping out of reach for too many Maryland families.
When I went to college, my parents had both graduated from high school, and all they wanted was the opportunity for their children to go to college. And I did, and we did what a lot of families did. We pieced together the loans and the grants and scholarships and work study and a little tiny bit of savings if you have that. Even with that, I still came out. Parents' homes. And so I think that we have to make college more affordable. And I think there are a number of ideas for doing that. I've signed on to some of them, but it could be free community college in the first couple of years of college, reducing the burden of student loans and interest rates. And I think these are all good ideas, and it's going to take people in the Senate who really understand that perspective and what it means to pay those huge amounts in student loans. But we also have to make sure that we're making investments in all colleges and universities, and it's why I authored legislation, which is in effect now, to provide greater resources to historically Black colleges and universities that are producing fully a quarter of our engineers in the country out of those institutions. And so it's important for us to bolster the research that goes on at those institutions and others to make sure that college is more affordable.
Well, you need to make sure we invest in opportunity from start to finish, from the earliest ages onwards, which is what we work to do in Maryland with the Thornton Commission legislation. We said we're going to make education a priority. We're going to fund it off the top, which is why it was so outrageous when Governor Hogan held up $70 million in funds for our Maryland schools. In the Congress, I've taken the same approach and introduced legislation that says the Congress has got to live up to its own commitments and keep our promises to America's children and teachers, and keep our PACT Act, which says, Congress, do what you say you're going to do. Fund education K through 12 at the levels necessary. It is outrageous that only half the kids eligible for Head Start in this country actually have funding for Head Start. You have so many Head Start programs here in the city, we need to expand that. Then we're going to need to make sure that when you finish high school, you can go on without these huge debts. So I put forward as part of the Democratic budget, 2-year free community college, which is the president's proposal. Worked very closely with the Congressional Black Caucus to make sure we also provided funding and adequate support for HBCUs, and then making sure that people who have already graduated can renegotiate their student loans at much lower rates, something Elizabeth Warren's put forward and I've put forward as a co-sponsor in the House, and then allowing income-based repayment. So the amount you have to repay for your loans is based on the income you're actually earning.
Well, what about the pathway to jobs? To invest in skill training, alternative pathways to employment. What's your job initiative?
Yeah, now this is, I think, an area where we really need to focus in Baltimore and around the state, because we have too many people who are finishing either high school or even community college or 4-year colleges without the skills that are necessary out there in the workforce. And so we need to build better pipelines between the learning that's going on and the employers and the jobs that are out there. And that means making sure that when we put together curriculum in community colleges or 4-year colleges, we're bringing the employers into the process so that when kids graduate, they've got the skills that they know they're going to get a job. We also need to expand apprenticeship programs, which is part of the plan that I put forward, because we should be incentivizing employers to help their employees build the skills that are necessary for them to be successful. South Carolina has an apprenticeship tax incentive. I proposed that for Maryland and the rest of the country. This is an area where we know we can make progress here in Baltimore City. You've got Johns Hopkins University through the Hopkins local program, now more expanded, trying to make sure that we bring in the big employers so that they're also focused on helping people build the skills to get the jobs throughout the city and throughout the state. This, I think, is the important missing link in our system today. We need to focus resources and effort there.
Very well.
I think we have to have a K-12 system that works so that if you're coming out of high school and you want to go directly into the economy, that you get the vocational and technical training that you need to be able to do that, or go into an apprenticeship program. If you're coming out of high school and want to go on to community college, that you're able to go to community college, get even an associate's degree that puts you on a pathway to going into a job in the economy. And then our 4-year institutions have to be a better match for what the economy holds. And so that means that our young people, that we have to have a match between what our young people are studying in college and what the jobs are in the economy. I just recently visited a Masonry Institute where I met 5 young men from Baltimore City, and they have been involved in Job Corps, and now they are on their way to apprenticeships at the Masonry Institute, learning a skill set that as soon as they finish there, it's a residential program, and as soon as they finish, they will be placed in jobs where they're making $18 an hour as apprentices. This is coming out of high school into a skill set for the economy. And I think that every year I do a college fair in my district, and I call it College and Career because we have apprenticeship programs, colleges and universities, community colleges, all of the things that it's going to take to move people from where they are in high school and beyond directly into the economy.
Very well. Powerful special interests are standing in the way of proven policies to reduce gun violence in our country. Will you pick up the battle dealing with the issue of gun violence and what needs to be done with our guns?
Well, I have. Long before I came into the United States House of Representatives, I ran an organization called the National Network to End Domestic Violence. We were the principal supporters and leaders on passing the Domestic Violence Defender Gun Ban, which is law today. We had to fight the National Rifle Association to keep it in place. We had to fight the National Rifle Association when they challenged us in court, and we won. In the House of Representatives, I'm on our gun violence task force. I've authored legislation to strengthen the protections around domestic violence and guns, an area of my expertise. I've introduced legislation on the floor of the House just a couple of months ago that would allow the Centers for Disease Control to do research on gun violence. And so we have to tighten those loopholes. You shouldn't be able to buy a gun at a gun show, on the street, or on the internet that you don't have to present identification and be subject to a background search. And I think the president has gone a long way in terms of his executive authority, but we need to go another direction on the legislation. I've stood up to the National Rifle Association before. I'll do it again. And I have to say, this is a point of departure with me and my opponent. In his campaign finance disclosure bill, he exempted the National Rifle Association. And I said, no, absolutely not. The National Rifle Association cannot get an exemption, even for campaign finance disclosure, because that is the way that they have an avenue into our politics.
Well, Larry, let me say, gun violence is something that is plaguing all our communities here in Baltimore City, around the state, around the country. And I must say it's very disappointing to hear Congresswoman Edwards playing politics with an issue of such significance. One of the things I did early in the state legislature was take on and beat the NRA. We had a Maryland mom by the name of Carol Price who lost her son, 12-year-old son, in an accidental gun shooting. And she wanted to make sure that tragedy didn't happen to other moms. And so we teamed up. We took on some in our own party. We beat the NRA. We passed the bill. It was the first in the country. President Clinton, you may recall, came to Annapolis for that bill signing. Since then in the Congress, I've been leading the fight. I've introduced legislation that based on the Maryland model to require people to get a license before they get a gun, just like you need a license to get a car. And leading the fight to try and prevent people who are on the terrorist watch list from being able to walk down the street and get a semi-automatic weapon. Now, the legislation that Congresswoman Edwards is talking about had to do with ending secret money in politics and the Koch brothers. Let me just say, I stood with the President of the United States. I stood with Senator Mikulski. I stood with Elijah Cummings, Congressman Elijah Cummings, and Congressman John Lewis, because we took on the Koch brothers to get secret money out of politics. And Congresswoman Edwards, unfortunately, has been trying to distort this for political purposes at a kind of desperate moment, apparently, in her campaign, started running ads on this. So I'm glad that we raised this issue. I stood with the president, with Congressman Cummings, and Senator Mikulski on ending secret money in politics.
Very well. Promises have been made to those who have earned the dignity of a secured retirement after paying into Medicare and Social Security all their working lives. The nation can be judged by how it treats our most vulnerable. What commitment will you make to the seniors in our state?
Well, Larry, I will not only make the commitment, I've been living the commitment. leading the fight as the Democrats' point person on the Budget Committee to protect Social Security. Democratic leader Pelosi is quoted in the Baltimore Sun this morning as saying that I was the point person leading this fight against the Tea Party efforts to cut Social Security and voucherize Medicare, and not only preventing the cuts, but putting forward and joining proposals to expand Social Security and strengthen it for future generations, which is why I have a 100% rating from the Alliance for Retired Americans. And while the person who heads up the organization called the Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare over generously described me as the savior at the negotiating table for Democrats. So this is not something I only talk about. This isn't something I only vote for. I have been the Democratic point person on this, unanimously elected by my colleagues, including Congresswoman Edwards, I might say, who supported my efforts until this campaign, and in fact, as of today, is launched an ad attacking me on this issue. So I really find it unfortunate, like on the gun violence issue, that having supported my efforts for so many years, now that we're in election, Congresswoman Edwards has been playing politics with Social Security, something that is so fundamentally important to our seniors.
Congresswoman Evans, we're going to return after a break, and you'll be given the opportunity to give your response.
Thank you.
Now we'll be returning. I'm going to take a break, get some information in, and we'll be right back. To the Larry Young Morning Show on WOLB 1010 AM and WOL 1450 AM NBC. And of course, Praise 106.1 FM. This morning, we are having the opportunity to have a forum with the major candidates for the United States Senatorial seat to be under retirement of Senator Barbara McCoskey. And we're honored to have with us Congressman Donna as well as Congressman VanHollen. And we're going to continue with our Q&A. I was asking the question, promise we make to those who earn the dignity of secure retirement after paying into Medicare and Social Security all their working lives?
Well, first of all, Social Security and Medicare are not a program, they're a value. They're the value of an earned benefit and retirement security. And I will say that I'm glad that Mr. VanHollen is in the place that he is now, supporting the strongest proposed expansion of Social Security and Medicare. But he was not in the right place in 2012, when as part of the Simpson-Bowles committee, he said that, in his words, that he was willing to consider the balanced approach of revenues and cuts, and those revenues and cuts included cuts to Social Security and Medicare and raising the retirement age. And to me, as a Democrat, the value of Social Security and Medicare is that it is an earned benefit, that it's a commitment from one generation to the next generation for retirement security, and that under no circumstances, just to cut a budget deal, should we be willing to consider cuts to Social Security and Medicare. And that is just a fact. Mr. VanHollen said it to Bloomberg News. He said it to Fox News. He said it to the Wall Street Journal. In his words, it was a balanced approach to revenues and cuts. And those were cuts to Social Security and Medicare. He can rewrite that history now. And then you don't just have to listen to me. Bloomberg News, Wall Street Journal, and Fox News. And so your viewers and listeners can go and see for themselves. But that is not what you do when you want to protect the retirement security of Americans.
A question. A grateful nation must support those who are willing to risk their lives for our safety and freedom. Those who serve by working hard to provide them with dignity, for quality health care, education benefits, affordable housing, opportunities to start businesses. There are 21.8 million veterans in the United States Armed Forces today. As a group, they are facing a series of challenges that we as a nation must work hard to address. 11% of all homeless Americans are veterans.
You know, and Maryland, of course, has one of the highest density populations of veterans in our country. And it is why I have spent a lot of time in my congressional district connecting our veterans to the services and benefits that they're entitled to. My dad served almost 30 years in the United States Air Force very proudly, and so did my brother, both of whom are deceased now. They very much needed the services that are offered in the Veterans Administration, mental health services and health services for their physical health. And so I have worked really diligently in my congressional office and in my representation to make sure that we continue to strengthen the protections that are offered to all of our veterans by virtue of having that relationship with them precisely because they've served our nation. And so I think there's more that we can do. Our office recently just had a gentleman who was having a hard time getting his disability declaration from the Veterans Administration, and we were able to work hard to get that for him, which also returned him back benefits that were owed to him, education benefits, housing benefits, and I think that we should make good on the commitment that no veteran should be left behind by ensuring their housing and ensuring their continued medical care.
Well, Larry, you know, my dad's family's from Baltimore, and the only reason I wasn't born here was he went into the United States Navy. We need to make sure that our troops overseas get everything they need on the battlefield, and we need to make sure that when they come home as veterans, that we're here for them because they've been there for us. And that starts with keeping our promises across the board, making sure they get the very best health care a nation can provide. Making sure that we open job opportunities, and I've supported the President's efforts in the budget to create more opportunities for veterans. Making sure that we have the mental health benefits that are there, because so many returning veterans are affected by things like PTSD. And we need to address the scandal of veterans homelessness and push for what are called VASH vouchers to make sure in the area I currently represent, we've actually been able to reduce veterans homelessness to zero with County Executive Mike Lincoln and others. We need to do that across the state and across the country. Now, veterans are seniors too, and I want to take a moment on the Social Security issue because Congresswoman Edwards, unfortunately, is doing what people hate most about politics, which is misleading. On the Simpson-Bowles proposals, I specifically ruled out their proposal to cut Social Security. I led the fight against the President's proposal on change CPI. And this is important, the proposals I've supported were making sure that Medicare could negotiate for prescription drugs to save money in the Medicare program. Those are savings we can have. So Congresswoman Edwards really needs to stop misleading people. Unfortunately, she's put this in an ad, not just here this morning.
Let's assume Baltimore needs more federal intervention to deal with some of our crime challenges. If elected to the U.S. Senate, what would be the 2 or 3 actions you would take to have a lasting federal impact in supporting local efforts to reduce the number of violent crimes in the city?
Well, Larry, this, of course, is a huge issue in Baltimore and around the country. And we need to make sure that we have the resources available, but we also need to make sure that we change our model of law enforcement and focus more on community policing. And as you know, there's a big effort underway in Baltimore City and other places to move to that model so that you have neighborhoods where those who are there to protect the neighborhoods are seen as protectors. And we, of course, had the awful, awful tragedy of Freddie Gray here in Baltimore City, which opened up an important and long overdue conversation about his death and so many around the country about what we need to do. And I believe that we need to improve accountability and transparency among the police. And then we also need to get at the issue of criminal justice reform, because for too long in this country, we have treated substance abuse, nonviolent substance abuse, and addiction as a criminal issue rather than a substance abuse issue. And that has resulted in the scandal of mass incarceration. So at the federal level, I put forward proposals along with many of my colleagues. One is called the Smart Sentencing Act. The other is called the Safe Justice Act. These are the comprehensive proposals at the federal level to move forward. As you know, they're having a big debate in Annapolis right now on criminal justice reform. And I support the ongoing efforts there, Senator Dolores Kelly and so many others. We need to address this fundamental issue.
Well, I think the first order of business for the federal government is to provide resources for local law enforcement departments like Baltimore City to engage in training of law enforcement officers and recruitment of law enforcement officers on an ongoing basis so that they understand and can work with communities that they're charged with, for which they're charged with ensuring their safety. And so I have a history of experience on issues of domestic violence and changing the entire culture of the police department through ongoing training and developing community policing efforts so that the community is actually part of policing. I have to tell you, as a mom, I remember, my son's 27 now, and I remember when he was in about 8th grade, having to have a real conversation with him about potential interaction with law enforcement because I was afraid for him. And there are a lot of good law enforcement officers out there, but we have to change the culture of policing so that it really does work with and for communities. I support the efforts that are ongoing here in Maryland, but we also have to make sure that there's accountability and transparency and that there's civilian participation in that accountability and transparency for law enforcement, and then making deep investments in things like reentry programs so that there's not a return to criminal behavior. These are things that we can do at the federal level that aid our local government.
I'm going to ask you another 30 seconds on it because this is a two-part question. Here are two questions. In one, to help the audience, I call family, see how you view Charm City. Tell us what you consider to be Baltimore's greatest strength and how your senatorial support would build on that. Number two, what do you see as our area of greatest challenge? How your support would turn that around?
Well, I've had the privilege of being able to visit so many Baltimore communities and neighborhoods, and I think that the greatest strength is in the resilience of the people who live here and their love, absolute love of Charm City. I was visiting with a group of young men in a male mentoring program in the hood, it's called. And these young men, they were ages 8 to 17, were expressing their hopes and dreams and aspirations for the future. And I think that the resilience of Baltimore is that we can be invested in their future. In young Harold, who wants to be a mathematician, we can invest in his future. I think the challenge, of course, is connecting people to the resources that enable them to make their own lives whole, and giving people capacity to do that, investing in education, because children, it should not be the case that their zip code determines the kind and quality of education that they get. That we're invested in that young person who may have made a mistake in their life, but they want to rebuild their lives, and so we should give people a second chance to do that with a job, with an opportunity, and with education. It's the reason, for example, that I've embraced the idea of restoring Pell Grant eligibility to people who are incarcerated, because it's not as though people go to some other community. They come back to our communities, that come back to Charm City, and they ought to have the benefit of a job and education and an opportunity. And so I think the strength of Baltimore is in the resilience of its people, and the challenge is in making sure that the resources match the opportunities and the aspirations.
Any questions?
I know. I think look, I think the strength of this great city lies in the people of this great city and huge potential. And our challenge is to make sure that every child who grows up in Baltimore City can reach his or her full potential, which begins very early on in life. And I visited a number of the Head Start programs here in Baltimore City. And saw the smiles on all the kids' faces, those who had an opportunity to engage in those early learning activities. And at the same time, I saw the long waiting lists of kids who should be in Head Start programs and did not have that opportunity. We need to continue to build those opportunities from the earliest days in education, right through K through 12, and on to looking at job training opportunities, which is why we do need to put more investments in our schools to reduce the class size. And we need to focus on community schools where there's more after-school opportunities and more wraparound services so that the teachers can focus on teaching. And you can also make sure that kids at that school get the other needs that they are facing, whether it's with healthcare or whatever may be going on at home, where you're allowed to bring the parents into the school community so they can be part of making sure that that child has what he or she needs. And then on to community colleges or four-year colleges, whether it's at Morgan or Coppin or any other university here in the state of Maryland, and the training programs that we talked about earlier, which are so important. I've visited many organizations and talked to so many community leaders, and I think so much of the activity has to take place at the community level. There's an organization called Humana, which is helping people with re-entry programs. And you see people who are coming out of the prison system, getting the training they need, and starting small businesses, having a real second chance. And so we need to make sure that that is something that continues to bring people together so everybody in this great city has a chance to succeed.
Very well. How can Baltimoreans be convinced that you, having represented a congressional district with what might be considered high medium household income, be sensitive to some of the social economic issues that confront many other areas of the state like Baltimore? Another sector. More directly, what have you done through your public service to date that shows you understand those concerns and have experiences that can be used to help people here in Baltimore. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Larry. I think because that's what I've done my entire public life, beginning during the time I served in the Maryland legislature. And while I represented a particular district, I always saw it as my responsibility to look out for the people of the entire state of Maryland. And you recall, after the Maryland Court of Appeals said that we had a school funding system in Maryland that was both inequitable and inadequate, I worked with my colleagues from Baltimore City and around the state to make that historic investment so that we would increase funds for school kids in Baltimore City and in a way that helped everybody in the state have an opportunity. And that's why you just have to ask so many of my colleagues here in Baltimore City who have endorsed me in this campaign. And we're looking for somebody who will help regardless of race or regardless of ethnicity or regardless of gender. I'm proud to have the support of State Senator Joan Carter Conway. She endorsed me on your radio show because she knows my heart and she also knows my commitment to following through on issues that are so important to her constituents. Proud to have the support of State Senator Nathaniel McFadden in the 45th Legislative District, worked with him in East Baltimore, and the President of the City Council, Jack Young. These are individuals who want to make sure they have a partner in the Senate who will work on issues that are important to what will be all of our constituents. I've lived that. I've done that. I mentioned the state legislature, but I've worked with President Obama at the federal level to pass through the Affordable Care Act so that 18 million Americans will have more access to affordable health care. Worked to try and address gun violence, where we have so much farther to go. So I'm proud that these individuals that know my work are supporting me and looking for a partner in the United States Senate.
Thank you very much, Larry. You know, I think that perspectives really matter, and I have spoken with people in my congressional district and around the state about my perspective. You know, although I didn't talk about it for a long time, I raised my son mostly on my own from the time that he was 3 years old. I understand the struggles of juggling the rent and the electric and late fees for daycare. And these are things that really inform me when it comes to making public policy. It's the reason that when I first came into Congress, the very first piece of legislation that I shepherded through was something called the After School Suppers Program, because I'd been visiting schools all around my congressional district where kids were receiving free and reduced breakfast and lunch. And as a mom who had struggled to put food on the table, I just asked a simple question: what happens to them at dinner? And it turns out that for whatever reason, some politicians really didn't see these families, but they were like my family. And I was able to get Maryland added to the After School Suppers Program. And in fact, the very first supper program that I visited after that was enacted into law was actually not in my congressional district. It was right here in the city of Baltimore, kids who were going hungry. And so I shared that because I think that when you have a perspective as a mom who's struggled and worked her way into the middle class, that's an important perspective to have in the United States Senate. And I think it is the reason that today we're announcing the endorsements of Delegate Corey McCray, Delegate Antonio Hayes, and Councilman Brandon Scott. These young new generation of leaders who are saying this is about the future of Baltimore and about the future of our state. And they have embraced my ability to represent a district that when I was in Congress looks very much like some of the challenges that we face here in Baltimore, and I'm looking forward to doing that in the United States.
The struggle for equal rights and equal justice. The history of our country is a story of ongoing struggle to achieve the original promise of equal rights and equal justice for all. That has been the story of labor rights, women's rights, civil rights, LGBT rights movements. But more progress needs to be done. Are you willing to pick up the fight for gender equality and voting rights?
Well, absolutely. I mean, first of all, let me just say, you know, some time ago, when the Black Lives Matter movement emerged after Ferguson and then increased, I was one of the first members of Congress to identify with them. And the reason is because I believe that every great movement in this country for equality and for justice has always been led by young people. And I think that the movement for justice and equality for women is led by young women who are, wondering why today they're being paid 78 cents on the dollar, or for Black women, it's 64 cents on the dollar, and for Latinas, it's 49 cents on the dollar. That means that they effectively work half of the year for free, and it also means that they go their entire lives and they lose out on retirement and savings and the ability to take care of their families because of this disparity. And so the fight for equal rights, for justice, for voting rights isn't a marker in time. It didn't end 50 years ago or 40 years ago. It is today. And I think that it is my fight, both as a woman and a woman of color, and it's our fight as Americans to ensure that every single American deserves the justice and equality that's owed to them by our Constitution. And whether you're a woman, you're a young Black man on the street, you are in a workplace, and that is a fight that doesn't end. And lastly, I would say, I think about my grandmother who was born January 1st in the year 1900 at the turn of the century. When she was 65 years old, she first realized the right to vote. When she was 65 years old, she first got access to Medicare. These are our struggles today, and it's my struggle for my grandmother.
Well, Larry, this is the ongoing story of America, the struggle to make good on the promise of equal rights and equal justice and equal opportunity. And we know it's been a long struggle, and we've come a long way, but we have a long distance to go. And the fight for equal pay for equal work is all of our fight. It affects women and families, because if the family's not able to put bread on the table, everyone is harmed. So we need to fight every day on this, and this is why, as part of putting together the Democratic plan in the United States Congress, I worked with our colleagues to make sure this was front and center: equal pay for equal work, paid sick leave, so that people don't have to lose a day's pay in order to care for a loved one. These are issues of economic justice and economic opportunity, and they also are fundamental in terms of making sure that we provide those educational opportunities. Let me just say, with respect to voting rights, that we are seeing this continuing under threat around the country. Justice Scalia, who passed away recently, was in a 5-4 decision and made a big fight out of the Voting Rights Act. Within days, states like Texas and North Carolina put up barriers to people voting. It's a pretty horrible thing in America when people try to win elections by making it harder for people to vote, expanding the circle of vote in this country. These are issues that I fought in the state legislature and the Congress. It used to be in Maryland, there wasn't a way to count provisional ballots. Those are often the people who were forgotten in these elections. I was proud to lead one of the early fights to make sure that people in Maryland weren't discriminated against in housing based on the person they love. So these are fights that I've not just talked about. These are fights I've taken on, and fights that we've won, and fights where we still have a long way to go.
Thank you very much. We're going to take in 30 seconds a 5-minute break. We're going to return. OL 1458 and 20.1 FM. Join us in 5 minutes. We'll take up this information. Thank you so very much. We can continue into the last major segment of our forum with the United States Senatorial candidates for their party, Congresswoman. I vote for all these questions. And we are continuing on. In the wake of the, a new question. In the wake of the tragic deaths of Freddie Gray, Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, Walter Scott, and Sandra Bland, and so many others, what will you do to continue to press for urgent action on the criminal justice reform and efforts to build trust between law enforcement and the communities that they serve?
Well, Larry, let me just say that the tragedy of Freddie Gray's death is one that needs to be not just talked about with urgency, but acted upon with urgency. You saw a young man get into a police van alive, and he ended up dead. And we need a system that both prevents that from happening in the first place and holds people accountable. And we've seen these deaths around the country. So this is not an isolated incident. It's part of the systemic problem of racism in our criminal justice system, which is why I stand with the Black Lives Matter movement and do believe that we need to take urgent action in many different areas. One, with respect to police accountability. We need more community policing. We need a different culture where people are seen as part of the neighborhood, there to provide protection and safety. We need to recognize the law enforcement officers that do a good job, but we need to make sure we hold accountable those who don't. Transparency is important. I support the idea of having cameras to capture the moment and tell the truth. But we need to go even deeper than this because so many people are being locked up because of substance abuse issues and addiction, which should be treated not as a criminal matter, but as a healthcare matter. And it's because you have a huge concentration of law enforcement in places like Baltimore City that so many are being locked up for that reason, whereas in other parts of the state you also have huge substance abuse problems, but you don't have the result of mass incarceration. And then, Larry, we need to deal with the fundamental issues. We know in Baltimore we have a tale of two cities, and we've talked about the challenge of economic justice and opportunity so that when the Freddie Grays are growing up, they have real opportunities in life. Those are the kind of things we need to do and act on with urgency.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think when you look at the tragedy surrounding Freddie Gray's death, that was just in front of us, but illustrating a problem that is taking place not just here in this city, but all across the country. And as I mentioned before, I think for me particularly as a mom of a young man, I remember worrying about him tremendously when he got his driver's license and whether he'd be stopped by law enforcement. And I don't know that every family has those kind of conversations with their children, but I know I had to have that one with my son. And I think that, this is a problem of both police training and accountability, about recruitment of law enforcement. We saw that in Ferguson. About making sure that we change the entire culture of policing so that we have law enforcement officers who are partners with the community in their own safety and protection. And we don't have that now. And I don't think that this is something that is solved overnight. And it starts from the top in leadership all the way down at the ground to those law enforcement officers who are out in the community. And I think that there are federal resources that can be deployed that can actually help to make that happen in providing resources for training, for retraining, for things like body cameras. But I don't want to just see what happens after the fact. I want to prevent it from happening in the first place. And so it is why I haven't ever supported things like mandatory minimum sentences that have resulted in huge numbers of rates of incarceration, people returning to communities who aren't able to get jobs, opportunity, and an education. It's why we have to make sure that we're really investing in our local communities so that they have the ability to rebuild themselves and to make themselves whole with law enforcement.
Well, please share with us the name of a prominent African American who helped to inspire your life of public service and a specific act you performed as a result of that inspiration.
Well, I'm wearing them, and it's two actually, Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman. And I think about their legacy of fighting for equal rights and equal justice. And I believe that that is our calling card for the 21st century, making sure that all of us have an equal ability to participate in the economy, making sure that the rules are fair for our small and minority and women-owned businesses so that we can help to grow in this economy, making sure that education works no matter what zip code a child lives in. And so these are people who've inspired me. In fact, when I came into Congress, a group of people on the Eastern Shore were trying to get federal designation for the Harriet Tubman Memorial, and I just visited it over the weekend, and it's fully up, and it's going to tell the history and the story of Harriet Tubman and what she contributed to our country and to equality and to freedom. And I think that if every day I can live those words and those ideals of freedom and justice, and just think about what it is that we can do to help people grow their way into the middle class. And so they inspire me because they are about moving forward. And the other reason they inspire me is because as women, they were leaders well before their own time, or maybe just the right leaders for their time. And I think that it's important for us to have leadership in the United States Senate that really reflects our values and reflects our hopes, our dreams, and our aspirations for our community.
Well, Larry, there are many, but John Lewis is a hero of mine. John Lewis led the march on Bloody Sunday across the Edmund Pettus Bridge for voting rights. Beaten badly, he didn't give up. He went back at it. Was joined by Dr. King, and that led to the passage of the historic Voting Rights Act. And one of the privileges I've had as a member of Congress is to be able to take the civil rights pilgrimage with John Lewis down to Alabama, down to Birmingham, and Montgomery, and so on, to walk through that time and listen to people who were on the front lines. And each time I've gone 3 times with John Lewis, I've taken a different one of my 3 children because I wanted them to see the struggle that people have gone through in our country to try to build a more perfect union, and the blood, the sweat, the tears that have been spilled. And of course, nobody can actually ever put yourself right there. But the important lesson that I wanted them to take away was that people of moral courage could change our country for the better. People working hand in hand to build a more perfect union. And that is a lesson that should inspire us all today, because we know the struggles that people have faced, and we know that we've come a long way, and we know the work that's still to be done. And the reason I wanted my children there was to see the capacity for good people to change things. And I was, about years later, when the president went to eulogize the 9 who were gunned down in South Carolina, that I was able to go with him and John Lewis and Elijah Cummings on the plane and witness the incredible grace of people who had been involved in that tragedy and the president's call for a more perfect union.
Thank you very much. Putting gender equality into the United States Constitution is long overdue. And I need we want to ask of you, what efforts will be made to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, ERA, which has fell 3 states short of ratification in 1970s?
Well, Larry, this is one of those ongoing battles. We talked about the March for Civil Rights. We talked about the changes we've seen in this country over time. All those changes took place because people didn't give up and they kept marching. As you said, we're just a few states short on the Equal Rights Act to put in the Constitution very clearly full equality for women. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the legislation in the Congress to move forward on the Equal Rights Amendment. And we need to keep fighting to get it passed and to get it ratified. And as we continue that fight, we've got to keep fighting on these other issues we talked about, equal pay for equal work. Look, my mom was a very talented woman, and she became very interested in foreign policy issues. She was the daughter of an English teacher who became a Russian expert, but she found herself having to battle to get a job in the State Department. She married my dad, but at that time, if you were the spouse of a Foreign Service officer, you yourself couldn't get a job, even if you had all the same talents. It was an example of gross discrimination. The Equal Rights Amendment had been in effect at that time, you wouldn't have seen it. So we need to keep fighting to make sure that we put that requirement in the United States Constitution as we keep fighting these other battles to make sure that everybody in our country has that same equal opportunity in every sphere of our life.
Well, I've joined my colleague and many others in supporting the legislation that would not require us to start over when it comes to ratification for the Equal Rights Amendment. And so to start from where we are to enable 3 more states to come on board. And I will carry that fight in the United States Senate. And I have to say, as a woman member of the House of Representatives, only 19% of our representative body in the House and only 20% in the Senate are women. And yet we make up over 50% of the population. In the United States Senate, there are 100 senators, 20 women, no women of color, 1 woman of color in the United States Senate. My former classmate, Daisy Hirono from Hawaii. And so we have a long way to go when it comes to equality of representation in our boardrooms across the country, in the top Fortune 500 companies, a very, very small percentage of women. And I think that if we had the ability to have an Equal Rights Amendment, it would allow us to make so much more progress in these other areas, in areas of equal pay for equal work, in areas of making sure that women are able to make the advancements that are required in our economy. And if women are not fully participating in our economy, it isn't just those women and those individual families who lose, but as Americans, we lose. Our entire economy loses. And so the struggle for equal rights is not one that ends even on the day of passing an Equal Rights Amendment through all of the legislative bodies, but it's an ongoing struggle and fight for equality in our political sphere, in our boardrooms, and in our workplaces across the country.
I'm trying to be very mindful of the 2 minutes I want to give each of you for closing, so let's see if we can do that. Question will be for you to answer, and the next question separate, so you don't answer. You will see why one of the questions comes. Congresswoman Evans, if elected to the U.S. Senate, you would be the first African American in that seat. Tell us what you would have accomplished at the end of your first 6-year term that would allow us to feel like our vote meant something more than giving you the title.
Well, thank you. And let me just say this. I do think that making history is important, but making a difference for America's middle class and people working their way into it is more important. And so it is why when I get to the United States Senate, at the top of my agenda are going to be, the idea of bringing jobs and opportunity to people who've been left out of the economy. And so when we think about funding our nation's transportation and infrastructure, it sounds like a big picture idea, but one that's really necessary to create jobs. I want to make sure that those jobs and contracting goes to small and women and minority-owned business so that they can fully participate in the economy. When we talk about criminal justice reform, I want to make certain that my voice at the table ensures that when we do criminal justice reform, we do it in the right kind of way, that we get rid of mandatory sentences, that we lower the incarceration rates for people who need drug treatment and abuse, that we make certain that people who are incarcerated have the ability to rebuild their lives with a job and an education through Pell Grant and other eligibility. And so it's there's a lot of work to do, but I hope that at the end of my first term, that as your next United States Senator, that Marylanders are going to know that I've gone to bat for them every day. And that when the discussions come up around Social Security and Medicare and who's going to protect it, that they know that I'm standing on their side and that I'm going to go to bat for all Marylanders who are in the middle class and who want to work their way into it.
Thank you very much. Congressman VanHollen, if people of color choose you over electing the first person of color to the U.S. Senate, how will you substantially partner with the minority community before your first 6-year term is over to demonstrate that their votes were excellent investments and not a lost opportunity?
Well, Larry, thanks for that question. And, I would say to the people of Baltimore, and especially to African Americans in Baltimore City, look not only at my heart, but on my record of working over a long period of time with the African American community and people in Baltimore City to make a difference for the people here. Starting during my time in the Maryland legislature, where I always took the view that our state is only strong if every part of it is strong, Baltimore City is strong, and every community is strong. The battle to pass the Thorium Commission legislation was a real battle, and it dramatically increased our funds in the future of Baltimore City's children. We have a long way to go, we know that, but that was a battle we fought together and succeeded in. I have been continuing to lead that effort, working very closely with President Obama. Proud to have been assistant to the Speaker at a historic time, and working very closely with not only our first African American president, but I believe someone who will go down in history as one of our very best presidents. And I was proud to be part of the leadership team that passed Obamacare and resulted in 18 million Americans having affordable health care today. I was proud to work with him in passing Wall Street reform, which, while not perfect, make sure that we won't make sure that our taxpayer dollars are on the line for gambling on Wall Street. And the economic recovery bill, which has helped bring jobs back, although we need to continue the fight for wages. So I welcome the opportunities, as I've been doing from my first days in office, to sit down with neighborhoods and community associations, which I've been doing every week here, to listen to the people of Baltimore, to listen to people in the African American, because at the end of the day, the easy part is identifying the problem. The hard part is putting forward solutions and getting things done, and that's what I have done.
Thank you very much. America must continue to play its unique leadership role around the world and promote human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Do you believe that we can protect and promote our vital interests through a combination of what to get that done?
Well, I believe the United States needs to remain the leader in the world. And I believe that we need to recognize that our power does not simply flow from the power of our military, which we need to keep strong, but by the power of our example. I remember years ago going into a little hut in Sri Lanka, and there on the wall was a picture of John F. Kennedy. And he was there because the Peace Corps had been to help bring water and sanitation. And so when it comes to protecting our interests, I do not believe we should simply rely on military force. I was one of the leaders against the effort to go into Iraq by military force. We also need to look at the power of our example.
I'm sorry for condensing 30 seconds off your time. Just want to give a quick response, and we'll get to 2-minute closing statements.
Well, long before I came into the Congress of the United States, I believed in the idea of investing in smart power and using the power of our ability to improve the health and the education and the welfare of all people as a means for our national security. And so not military might only. And I think that we can do that, and we've proven that in a number of places. We can do that on the continent of Africa, for example, but smart power and not military.
Thank you both for the clock to rule all of us at this point. Thank you. I wonder if just before we make a closing statement, let me give a great appreciation. I think the producer, Dr. Anthony Hughes, our good Mazer, Carl, the best engineer in the world, and Promotion, Civ, Coach, Raji, and of course James. Thank my sister here who's been beautiful. In the meantime, let's start with our closing statement. Well,
Larry, first of all, thank you for having us here today. You know, when I think of Senator Mikulski, I think of somebody who was focused like a laser on getting things done for everybody across our great state, Maryland and Baltimore City. And we got a lot of work to do. We cannot rest until every child, from West Baltimore to Western Maryland, from East Baltimore to the Eastern Shore, has the opportunity to get a great start in life and has a great education. And we can't rest until we build an economy that works for everybody in Baltimore City, and not those who just climbed the ladder to the top and are already the 1%. We need to end the scourge of gun violence and the scandal of mass incarceration. And it's easy to talk about these issues, but it's another thing altogether to put forward solutions. And on each of these big issues we've talked about today, I've not only identified the problem, but put forward proposals to move our country forward. It's not enough to talk the talk. We have to walk the walk. And we need to make sure that we work together to make sure we continue Senator Mikulski's legacy of investing in our state, in our country, in our schools, more money for infrastructure, making sure we have a strong and vibrant port, making sure we have funds for job training and opportunities. Those are all things we need to do together. We also need to make sure that when someone comes into our office in their hour of need, whether their home has been foreclosed upon or they can't get their Social Security check, that there's somebody who has a history of being there for them. And I have that history. You know, one of my favorite sayings is that the world needs dreamers and the world needs doers. But most of all, the world needs dreamers. I ask the people of Baltimore City to be dreamers and doers together. I ask for their vote in this election.
Well, thank you very much, Larry. This has been a great conversation about issues that really make a difference in people's lives. And when I thought about running for the United States Senate and the idea of trying to fill the incomparable shoes of Barbara Mikulski, I remembered that when Barbara Mikulski ran for the United States Senate, people told her and the political establishment said to her that she couldn't do it, that she shouldn't do it, and that she would never win the seat on her own if she hadn't inherited it from her husband. Well, thank goodness we've come a long way from then, because today, Senator Mikulski likes to say, they told me that I didn't look the part, but today the part looks like me. And on April 26th, we have an opportunity not only to make history, which is important, but also to make a difference in the lives of middle-class Marylanders and those who are just clawing their way, trying to work their way into the middle class. And I want to go to the United States Senate so that I can put their perspective and their seat at the table. One of my sheroes, Shirley Chisholm, used to say that if they don't make a seat for you at the table, bring a folding chair. And so on April 26th, I'm asking Marylanders to bring our folding chairs to the United States Senate so that we can carry the voice of that young man or woman who may have made a mistake but needs a second chance. and to the small businesses that want to grow and create jobs in our economy. And so that we can make sure that we're fighting for the seniors and the veterans who earn Social Security and deserve the protection of Social Security, so that we can say no to the NRA, no to the Wall Street banks. In fact, we need to put some of those in jail. And we need to say yes to the middle class. And so I thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to the opportunity of representing all Marylanders in the United States.
Family, we thank you so very much, Senator Thomas. I call you both senators already. Congressman VanHollen and Congresswoman Donna. Thank you for joining us this morning. I must tell you, as far as I'm concerned, we have a decision to make. It's going to be a tough one, but it's got to be made by April 26th. I want to thank all of you. Let's give them an applause for their parents.